joining the session. I joined one of the early morning sessions that was talking about blockchain and Bitcoin, and it was very, very interesting. So you've obviously got a lot of very interesting topics that you're going through, and I'm very honoured and pleased to have the opportunity to share some of my insights as well. For those who don't know me, my name's Paul Hodge. I've met a few of you already at various times, but for those who I haven't met, I've been around the industry now for more years than I care to count sometimes. I started actually out in telecommunications here in Melbourne, so I worked for the then, I guess it was Telecom back then, now Telstra. And then during the 90s, I ended up moving and living in Hong Kong, and actually both Hong Kong and Japan, both at the same time, working in consumer goods. So think things like chocolate and beer and wine and those types of things. And then during the 2000s, I lived and worked out of New York. And spent about 12 years in America, and met and married my wife, and moved back to Australia in about 2012. So I've been back now for about 8 years. Of course, we're glued to the television at the moment, trying to make sense of what's going on over in the US. And it doesn't make much more sense to us, having lived over there for a long time, as it does for anybody else who's observing it as well. But I'm really, as I said, pleased to be here today to talk to you about data visualization and about the tools that are available in that space. And I'm going to talk basically, look, I think that over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to break the talk up into about 3 different sections, and I'll try and move through them relatively quickly. But the 3 sections are going to be that I want to provide just a little bit of context first, and just share you know, what this space is actually all about, and how I would introduce typically the idea of data visualization. I do lecturing, I should also add, at a couple of the universities. So I do lecturing at the moment to postgraduate classes at Deakin and La Trobe, and also at Melbourne Business School. And they're typically for students who are going through things like accelerated MBAs, or people who are doing studies in statistics or computer sciences, that type of space. I don't typically teach in high schools, but there are a lot of resources. And so when I go through the session, I'm going to start out with a little bit of context. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the range of tools that are available, and give you a little bit of insight into that and how I think they are applicable in the academic and student sort of space. And then I'm going to give a little bit of a demo. So I'm going to jump out and show you a couple of the tools and show you how they might be used in a classroom setting. And then right at the very end, just as we're trailing out, so that's the 3 big sections. So intro, tools, and then a little bit of a demo. And then just to close out, I'll for at least one of the tools, which is Tableau, which is one of the sort of the main recommendations, I guess, I'm going to point you to some resources as well that you can get hold of, and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to move relatively quickly, but that's me. As I said, very pleased to be here. By the way, if you want to get in contact with me later on, you're more than welcome to either link up with me on LinkedIn, send me an email directly at hodge.paul@gmail.com. And also I've got a website called datavizguy.com. So it's dataviz with a Z, .com. And there are a lot of resources and pointers to various places around that have relationship to this topic as well. All right, so again, I want to sort of acknowledge, you know, part of the reason why we're obviously online is the COVID-19. This also is by way of some context around data visualization. Many of you will have seen this particular dashboard. I'm sure this is from Johns Hopkins University over in the States, and keeps a track of the number of cases globally, as well as the number of deaths and a number of other statistics as well. And even the whole concept of flattening the curve has been this sort of conversation around data visualization. So this as a topic has become, very obvious across the public space as well as the corporate space and potentially the educational space as well. Beyond that, I would also say that data visualization really at its core is about how do we perceive the world, and the fact that we have an image like this, which is an image clearly of a tiger, shows us how acute our visual systems are to picking up patterns and making sense of quite complex situations very, very rapidly using our visual systems. And just by way of a slight sort of technical hierarchy that goes on in our brains when we see an image like this, is that we basically go through 4 sort of fundamental steps. The first one is that we make observations, just general observations. In this particular case, those observations might be made up of shades of colour, shadows, basic lines and angles that might exist on the image. What happens from that is that then our brains put together objects from that. And in this particular case, the objects happen to be, say, blades of grass and an obvious tiger. The next level up from that is that then we actually start to articulate in our minds situations. So we become situationally aware. So not only is there blades of grass and a tiger, but now we're in a situation where we're confronted by a tiger. Now, there may be other issues that we have to think about, which is there a glass panel between us and the tiger? Are there more than one tiger? Are we in a vehicle? So there may be other other items within the situation that we have to become aware of as well. And then the last level is that then we start to think about scenarios, and we start to think about actions in that context. So what actions can we take? What actions do we need to take? Can we fight? Can we flee? Can we stand our ground? That type of information. So this idea of a hierarchy that our brain assembles is part of the nature of why data visualization works, and how we can teach it as a topic by breaking down these sort of concepts. So observations, objects, situations, and then scenarios. Now, when that comes to sort of people, of course, some of you may have seen this sort of visual before, but this is the idea that one of the things that's relatively unique about data visualization as opposed to a lot of other data sciences and computer science topics is that in this particular case, we're very much talking about interfacing directly to a human being. And the human beings by their nature are complex and are difficult to predict. And is effectively an uncontrollable situation. So we have people who are under stress, who have short attention spans. They have issues with short-term and long-term memory issues. They're often under pressure to make decisions and those types of things as well. And they're competing, their attention is being competing amongst a number of different priorities. So when we present, again, a set of measures, if you like, or observations, it's difficult for people to draw patterns out of those because they're not necessarily focused on that. And it's not something that they're doing all of the time. So if I asked you questions like, maybe a very obvious question might be, how many 7s are there in this image? And especially if I put you under a lot of pressure, and I know from past experience that if I do that, what happens is I get a varying sort of answers from anywhere from 5 to 6 to 7 to 9 to 8. And so people sort of have difficulty quickly coming up with that insight. If I treat it with some simple visual treatments, and in this particular case, what I'm doing is I'm using some preattentive concepts, which again is another whole topic within data visualization, is the whole idea that there are certain things like shape, color, texture, angle, these types of things which are inherently preattentive. And what happens with preattentive concepts is that we bypass a lot of the basic steps that our brain goes through, and we can bypass that and actually transmit the information much more directly into the processing areas of the brain, much like an image does. And so in this particular case, now if I asked you how many 7s there were, the answer is much more obvious that there's 8. And that's because I've changed the size, I've changed the color, and I've reduced the value or intensity of some of the other numbers. Now, however, if I ask you a bunch of other questions like how many ones are there, what's the least frequently occurring number, are there any numbers in here that are occurring different frequencies? Like, are there numbers that are occurring 3 times or 4 times? So I start to ask you a whole lot of other questions about the numbers that are present. Then it's much more obvious if I start to use a more traditional visualization, in this particular case, a histogram. And in this particular case, what's happened with a histogram is that now I can see things much more immediately again, where I can see the least frequently occurring number was the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, and the 9s all occur 3 times. The 4s, the 5s, and the 8s occur 4 times. It turns out that the 7s were the most frequently occurring number, and the 6s are the next most frequently occurring number. You'll also notice that in this particular visual, I've also highlighted using red the original question as well. So coming back to the purpose of the question in the first place is a very important part of data visualization. Did I answer the question that was asked originally by the audience? And hopefully, does that question enable that person to take action? And so there's this idea of action as being the real outcome, not just simply answering questions. But again, that's another topic to dive into at some point. So the main thing here is, again, to acknowledge that people are potentially irrational, emotional, but that we need to deal with that, and that in fact, that nature of humanity is perhaps what is the most important thing about them, and that's why they can process information quickly, put it into context, process it, and all that sort of stuff. Visualizations have the ability to enhance people by providing things like compression of numbers. So for example, I had a matrix of 6 by 6 numbers before, so it was 36 numbers, and it compressed down to this simple histogram. But I could have had a matrix of 100 by 100 numbers, and providing they were still only the digits 1 through to 9, it would still compress down to this same visual. Same might happen for a line chart, for example. A line chart might represent 50 numbers or 12 numbers, 1 for each month, or it could represent 2,000 numbers, because there could actually be lots of numbers that are being compressed down into a single line chart, for example. So compression is important. External memory, or a memory enhancer, is very important. We tend to remember images more than we remember a simple matrix of numbers. And so therefore, if I was to ask you to redraw this image at some point in the relatively near future, you'd be able to get the basic shape of the histogram, even if you didn't remember the individual numbers. There's a concept called the memory castle, where people use the idea of images in their minds to actually remember quite complex sets of numbers. And so images are very, very good at enhancing our ability to memorize things. Another one that images do as well is they complement the concept of storytelling very well. So in addition to data visualization, there's a, if you like, an emerging science around the concept of data narratives and data storytelling, which is a whole nother topic again. It's inherently related to data visualization, because we often use visualizations as part of the storytelling process. But data storytelling is another field again, which is very tightly related. And as I said, it's much more about creating narrative and about explaining insights rather than just simply presenting visualizations. But it's another part of it. But the point is that visualizations help build a framework for a narrative development and narrative storytelling. And the last one is this idea of high bandwidth communication. So information is communicated very quickly if we use some of these pre-attentive ideas. So again, that's fundamentally what's going on there. One last sort of slide about trends that are happening, because I was talking a little bit about data visualization and data storytelling. I would say, very broadly speaking, across the data visualization space is really 3 sort of very broad topics going on. One is compute power, and that is the ability to build increasingly more complex models in visualization. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that in the data visualization tools when I show you that a little bit. But that's really more about not just simply presenting a bar chart or a line chart, but actually using quite complex algorithms, maybe to do simple things like trend lines, but more complex things now like clustering, or even looking for signals in the underlying data, so that I can actually say that here's an exception inside the data, and actually highlighting different patterns that might exist inside data. So very important things happening in the data compute space, including cloud usage and that sort of stuff. There's also different things happening in the experience space. And there's, when I say experience, it's really the way that we see visualizations. So if we're talking about data visualizations, those data visualizations might be delivered via a PC screen, but they might be delivered via a phone, or via a watch, or even via some augmented glasses, or even in the dashboard of a new car these days, right? So if you look at hybrids, there's a lot of visualizations that go on in a hybrid car about how much power is left in a battery, for example, or whether the wheels are current, or whether the engine is currently charging the batteries, or whether the energy that I'm getting is currently coming from batteries. So there's a lot of visualizations that are occurring now in a lot of different settings in our lives. And then the last one would be augmentation. And again, this is sort of the idea of augmented reality again, whether that be virtual reality headsets, where there's a lot more sort of three-dimensional sort of space, or whether it be, again, augmented glasses with augmented reality, where I'm overlaying information into the real space, into the real world. And that can have implications in things like occupational health and safety, where when I'm walking around a hospital, perhaps my augmented reality glasses tell me that there's a wheelchair out of place, or that there's a patient that's out of bed and they should actually be in bed, these types of information. The picture that's in this particular slide that I've got here is actually a guy who, going to the extreme, has actually had a permanent augmented reality visualization attached to his brain, and it's actually to help him overcome some colour blindness issues that he has. And so this is actually now a permanent augmented reality device that's implanted into his brain. Perhaps a little extreme, but maybe also a vision of what's going on in the future. So what that really brings me back to is really the last slide of this sort of context setting part of the talk, which is the idea that really what we're trying to talk about when we talk about visualization and data visualization is that on one side of the spectrum we have the emergence of raw cognitive power and analysis that we're doing with, say, machine learning or basic statistics or basic mathematics. So we've got sort of high cognitive power happening there, or raw cognitive power happening on one side. And then on the other side, we've got humanity, who is still very good at big picture and strategy and perception and decision making. And so what we're trying to do is really bridge those two gaps and put you in the middle. And one of the techniques we're going to be using is visualization to effectively achieve that, right? So that's all by way of some context and just some scene setting as we go along. I think we're going to have some time for questions and that sort of stuff. So if you've got questions and thoughts, hold on to them, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end to talk about that. So just a last little quote here then, that, you know, visualizations, visuals and visualizations ultimately should not be about simplifying messages. They should be about clarifying them. They should be about highlighting trends, uncovering patterns, and revealing insights and, you know, ideas that maybe weren't visible before. Okay. Now, I also put up Alberto here as a really interesting person. Usually when I give talks about data visualization or lessons about data visualization, I highlight a number of different luminaries. But in particular, Alberto is very interesting because he works, at least in part-time anyway, for a group called the Knight Foundation. So that's like Knights of the Round Table. So if you want to look it up, the Knight Foundation. And the Knight Foundation actually provide free education specifically designed for journalists. So they do basic statistics courses, data storytelling, data visualization, creations of blogs, audio, video, classes, that sort of stuff, but very much aimed at journalists. But the reason I mention it is because if you're trying to educate up yourself, they are very high quality, free educational services. And if you have a look at their agenda, they've got quite a lot of very good quality classes that are run on a relatively regular basis. So if you're interested, it's a very, very good resource as well. He has a great website as well called Functional Art, or thefunctionalart.com, and is a great website. There's another one also that I'll just give a quick nod to, which is called informationisbeautiful.net. So it's .net, not .com. So informationisbeautiful.net, and it's also another really great one that you want to go to for resources and examples and those sorts of things as well. Also, very good data sets for classes and those sorts of things as examples. All right, so that's the end of sort of section 1. Section 2, I want to start to talk a little bit about tools then. Right. So what tools could you use for teaching students about data visualization? And I'm sure some of these names will be more familiar to you than others, if you've been at least at all involved in the space. And what I wanted to do is show you a little visualization that I put together. This visualization is one that I've put together in both a product called Power BI. So if you've never heard of Microsoft's data visualization, it's called Power BI, and I'm going to be showing you that live in a couple of minutes. And the other one is Tableau, which is also another very, very good product that's very well used in industry, but also has a very good academic support system as well. And that's the one that I'm going to sort of talk about probably as the key recommendation for you. But let me show you this little visualization. So what I'm going to do is call it up in a browser. And I'm just going to bring this over onto my screen so you can see it. So, so this is a little interactive visualization, and in fact runs a little animation. Now, the animation is involved around a visual here, which is a visual that's created by an analyst group that some of you may be familiar with the name, but there's an analyst group called Gartner. Right, so Gartner is an analyst group, and by analyst group, what I mean is that they do a lot of assessments of the industry and of different types of industries. So they evaluate things like help desk systems and consulting companies, ETL software, statistics software, data visualization software. So they do lots of different industry-based analysis, and in theory, they're impartial. I don't think, I do think that they are impartial, right? So the problem is that, of course, software companies will approach Gartner and say, hey, look, I've got a really good offering, and they'll pitch themselves to Gartner. So the only qualification I would say is that the software may be great, but if the software company doesn't sell themselves well to Gartner, then they may not get rated well, right? So it's not the be end and end all rating, but it's a reasonably good indicator, at least for the top tier of software. So in this particular case, the visual that I'm going to show you is one that says, here's the ability to execute. And so basically, if a software company is executing on a worldwide basis to thousands or tens of thousands of customers, so they're proven to have a very good help desk system, maybe very good documentation, maybe a very good pricing scheme, very good deployment strategies, that sort of thing, and they're being used well by the industry, then they'll rate well on this ability to execute. So anything that's up here means that it's being used a lot in the industry. Anything that's down here is not being used widely. Okay, so there's a lot that are down here in this bottom quadrant, if you like. Then there's also this other axis over here, which is completeness of vision. And basically what that shows is how, broadly speaking, does the software appeal to a very wide audience? So does it have a lot of functionality? Is it trying to appeal to any sort of industry, whether it be banking or data sciences or life sciences or retail or government. So what is their sort of breadth of functionality really more than anything else? And what is their vision for the future? And so somebody who scores up in this top area up here is referred to as being a leader in the industry. And you'll see that in 2020, the two top ones were Tableau and Microsoft. And that's why they tend to be spoken about most prevalently. But there's a lot that are down in this bottom area down here, which is referred to as being the niche players, who are potentially very strong software packages, but maybe they are only appealing to a relatively small audience, and they have a very good offering, but not a very expansive offering. Maybe they've got a very good specialist area, right? So they're not trying to be everything to everyone, and so therefore maybe they're actually a really good software package, but they're just not trying to be everything to everybody. Or alternatively, maybe they're only relatively new on the scene and they're still making their way up the execution ladder, and maybe they'll be expanding their vision in the future, right? And then others, maybe they have a very good vision, but are yet to sort of execute higher. Now, one of the nice things about this visual, I'll show you one, is that if I do a play, what we get to see is it being replayed over time. So here's 2002, and here's what it looked like in 2002. Here's what it looked like in 2004. Here's what it looked like in 2005, 2006, 7, 8, and it keeps playing. And we've got two visuals. One is the ranking, pure ranking, which is just me adding up the ability to execute and vision. And then the other one is their relative positions in the marketplace. And what we can see is that they're moving around constantly. Now, one of the nice things about this particular visual is when it finishes, what I can do is I can hover over one of these and say, what's Microsoft's path been? And what I can see is that it started out over here and it's been progressively getting a better and better vision, which is very classic Microsoft. Microsoft tends to start off with a very high used package, but it doesn't tend to be very good initially. Think something like a product like SQL Server, which is their database package. It was heavily used, but not a great package. And over time, it's built out more functionality. The same things happened with Power BI. It's been well used, then it dropped off a little bit. And then they built out their vision more and more and more. And so they've ended up with a product that's got a very good vision, and now it's actually building up its audience again. So now it's sort of building back up. If we look at something like Tableau, on the other hand, so if I go back over to here, what's Tableau's journey been? They've sort of been similar, although they started out relatively low and came up. There's also another product that you might have heard about, which is called ClickTech, and ClickTech went up and then they've come back down again. And so they're sort of starting to fail a little bit. There's another one that you might be aware of called IBM Cognos, and IBM's Cognos's journey has basically been on the downswing for some time. And that's because Cognos got bought by IBM, and then it's been integrated into the IBM suite, and it's sort of diminished in vision over time. And as a result of that, is being used less and less and less. So the big players is really the message here, is now Tableau and Microsoft, who are basically really controlling this top end of the space. The only other one that I would give a bit of a nod to is a company called Looker. And it's basically only been around for a couple of years and is moving up the execution phase, not yet to make inroads into the strategy space yet. But the big news about Looker is that it just got bought by Google. Okay, so if it just got bought by Google, it means that Google now is going to put a lot of weight behind it. And I suspect they'll integrate it in with a lot of their existing product offerings. And I suspect what will happen is it'll accelerate upwards in the execution space, because more and more people will begin to use it. And if they can sort of overlay more of their machine learning and more advanced functionality, it may well shift over into the vision area as well. Okay. Now, the big question that you're likely to have, and this is what I'm now going to jump out in the next sort of 10 minutes or so and show you the software a little bit, is which one is easier to use, right? is probably the big question now, right? So, okay, so we've got two big players up here, Microsoft and Tableau, and I'm going to quickly show you a demo in both of those. So I'm going to try and do a problem and solve a problem in both of those products in the next sort of 10 minutes, and we'll see how they each operate. And the answer to that sort of fundamental question, which one is easier to use, is I would probably, at the sort of simplest summary level, is I would say that Tableau is probably easier to do simpler things in, but runs out of speed as you try to do more complicated things. Whereas Microsoft is maybe a little bit, has a slightly higher threshold initially, but it has a longer sort of pathway to do more complex things as you continue to move on, right? So maybe a little bit more difficult initially, but has more legs, whereas Tableau is maybe a little bit easier to use initially, but doesn't quite have as longer legs, right? It can do sort of very complex things, don't get me wrong, but maybe not as easy to do complex things as it is to do it in Microsoft. So I'll show you a little bit about what I mean by that right now. So what I'm going to do now is I've got a very simple data set that I'm going to play around with. So this is a very simple data set called my Hollywood data set. And this is a Hollywood data set. This is a data set that, in fact, I got from the informationisbeautiful.net website. Sorry, that's just me complaining. And basically the data is not too complicated, but, you know, complicated enough. It's got about 670 movies in it. So this is a movie database, and each row represents an individual movie. And the two primary measures of information in here are Rotten Tomato critic score and Rotten Tomato audience score, right? And then there are other attributes, things like, was the movie a comedy? What was the storyline? What was the genre? Then there's some other measures like things like, what was its budget? What did it get as a domestic gross revenue in the US, worldwide gross, how many movies, how many theaters did it open, sorry, how much money did it make on its opening weekend, how many cinemas did it open up in, and that sort of stuff, right? So it's just, you know, it's a range of movies that have ratings on them by genre and by various other attributes. And what we want to do is we want to visualize that information. Now, again, when I'm teaching this normally, one of the first things I'll do is I'll say, who's our audience? And I'll actually sort of try and describe who our audience might be and what their motivation is. So in this particular, the motivation is it's a stay-at-home mum who's looking to evaluate some movies, so most important job in the world. She's got reasonably good computer skills. And what she's trying to achieve is she wants to pick 3 movies for her kids to watch over summer and 3 movies for herself to watch over summer. And so therefore the questions that she wants to support with that wants to be things like, what are people's favorite romantic movies? What movies might my kids enjoy? What movies may we want to avoid, right? So that's some sort of basic questions. And then we've got things like, maybe that means that my primary information that I'm interested in might be audience rating and critic rating, maybe by genre, which would be this romantic sort of thing might come into play there. And then secondary information might be, you know, did it have a big budget? And what was its box office takings might be some other information that I'm interested in. And then the last one that I might think about is what's the emotion that I want the user to have when they're playing with the dashboard? And in this particular case, maybe it's just fun, right? And so then I've got an introduction slide, talks a little bit about what the data is and where it came from. So it's from David McCandless, who's the guy who runs informationisbeautiful.net and his team. So that's the data. So let's first of all go off and do the exercise in Tableau and have a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to go and open up a copy of Tableau that I've downloaded. Both of these products can be downloaded free from the internet. So if you just type in Tableau download, you'll get it. Now, when you download Tableau initially, you can activate it for a 2-week period. So this means I'm running a 13-day period here, which is fine for just, you know, playing around with the software. But what I'm going to show you is some links just as we close out the session where you can go to and you can actually get academic licensing as well. One of the great things about Tableau is it has very good academic support, which is really, really great. So I'm going to go and continue the trial. And to start with Tableau, what I have to do first of all is attach to some data. So let's do that. So let's attach to an Excel spreadsheet. Where's this Excel spreadsheet? Well, it's in my conference folder, and it's called Tableau. Oh, sorry, called Hollywood. So I'm going to open up that folder or that file. And then what it's going to typically do is say, oh, look, this has got more than one sheet in the Excel spreadsheet. Which is the one that you want to use? Well, it's this data file there, and that's it, right? So that's all I have to do to get my data in, and now I'm ready to start visualizing. And I'm going to create a couple of quick visuals. So I'm going to go to sheet 1, and on sheet 1, sorry, I'm just going to expand that up. On sheet 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Rotten Tomato score across the columns, and then I'm going to put audience score across the rows. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to represent that for every movie. And so what I end up with is a spread from 0% to 100% of all of the movies that I've got. And I can toggle that around, look at it from a different axis. So I've got one over here. So audience score, it looks like Dark Knight is very, very good on the audience score and pretty good on the critic score. And then I've got some other movies up here like The Artist, Harry Potter, Deadly Hallows, and some other movies in here that rate very well as well. Okay. Now, just because of later on, I'm also going to put a link out here because I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. So I might now call this pop, something like that. I'm just going to rename the sheet. So it's a little bit like creating an Excel spreadsheet, and then I'm going to create another sheet first, and in the second sheet I'm going to create genre in the columns. In the rows. And I'm going to put a count of the movies in there. And sorry, I'm going to change that to, get that off. All right, I'm going to put film on the numbers area. Why is it doing that? Films. Actually, I want to measure that, so I'm going to count it, right? And I'm going to change it to a little table. Actually, I'm going to change it to a chart. And sort it. So again, I'm jumping around here. Normally what I have is I have a PDF, which is a full tutorial, and we step through these steps. So this might be called ranking, something like that. And then I'm going to create one more little visual. And in here, I'm just going to put the number of movies in the middle. And I'm just going to simply say, count all of the movies for me. And so, and I'm going to show that again as a number, right? So 670 movies. And then the last little visual I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little table. And in the table, I'm going to put the name of the movie. I'm going to put the genre. I'm going to put how much money did it make. Or what was the budget? So I'm going to put the budget there. I'm going to show this as a table. So I'm going to put that like that. Put the movie back at the front. So I've got the movie budget. I'm going to show the worldwide gross maybe as well. Sorry, put that there. Why does it keep doing that for me? Okay, so I've got that, and then maybe I'm also going to put that little link in here as well, just so I can see that there's a link that I can go to actually get to some detail. And then I'm going to build a dashboard. And the way I build a dashboard is after I've created each of these sheets. So this might be total. This might be details. So just like I do an Excel spreadsheet, I create a series of individual visualizations, and then maybe I create a dashboard where I put my popularity here. I put my ranking off to the side. I put my detail down the bottom, for example, and then maybe I put my little ranking over in the top, my total over in the top side. And then maybe what I do is I rearrange these a little bit. Maybe I bring this one down a bit, bring this one down a bit, maybe move that over a little bit. And what I've now got is the ability, if I can move that over a bit, there we go. And now what I've got is the ability to sort of play around with these a little bit. I might say just extend that out so it does entire view. And so now what I've got is a visualization. And I can make these interactive so that if I now say things like just show me comedy, there's my comedies. Then I can say show me just the top 3 comedies. here's my top 3 comedies, 50/50, Juno, and The Muppets, right? So I've now got all of that. The last thing I might want to do is make this link a clickable link. And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to dashboard and say, I want to add an action. So there's a special action that I want to add, which is a URL action. And I want the URL action to work when I select something in the detail. And the visual that I want you to do is, or the thing that I want you to link on is this link, and say, okay. And now what happens is when I drill down to this sort of set of comedies, I can now click on this particular link. And what it will do is open up the Rotten Tomatoes score for that particular movie, which is 50/50. And then I can see who the actors are and some other information about the movie using Rotten Tomato and that sort of stuff. So that's it using Tableau. And I know I'm running a little bit late, but
yeah, I was just going to jump in there, Paul, and sorry to interrupt you, but we've
run out of time.
A next session starting at 1:30.
Okay.
Absolutely fabulous. Looking at the suggestions on the in the chat, it's just been brilliant the way people have responded. And
let me just a tail end.
This is just a wind-up warning there. Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, I can show you the same thing happening in Power BI, so very similar sort of exercise. The reason why I would recommend Tableau is these last 2 slides. And by the way, all of these slides are available, you know, as part of the supporting information for the session. But the last 2 slides are that the academic program, you can actually go and get an instructor's license, so you can actually fill out a form and you give it the name of the school that you work at and the class that you're going to be running and that sort of stuff. And you'll actually then get a 12-month license. And the same thing can be done for students as well. Students can actually go and register themselves. So you can get one of 2 things. You can get a teacher's license and you can get a class license. And the class license can be given to all of the students, or the students can actually individually register for a student license. And all they again have to do is just say they're a full-time student and what school they're at, and they can actually get their own individual license as well. And that license is available for 12 months. So very, very, very good resources. They also have some teaching resources as well, which is really great. So you can go there to get examples and all that sort of stuff as well. That's all I really wanted to do. I just wanted to say also, as I said, feel free to connect up with me. Sorry I ran a little bit over time, but at least I got to show you a little bit about all of the tools and a little bit about how to frame the topic. As I said, more than happy to have conversations with you via email and that sort of stuff if you want to do some other things as well. I think as we were told, we have to wrap up in the next 2 minutes. Was there any one question that you wanted to quickly ask of me?
Thank you very, very much, Paul.
Yeah, sorry I ran a little over time. My apologies.
That's okay. Well, I really enjoyed it. I mean, no one dropped out until I sort of said, hey, it's up after. So that's an indication.
Great.
So thank you very, very much, and I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to ongoing conversations with folks if they wish.